St. Petersburg, 1906. Just as the bells of St. Isaac's Cathedral tolled noon and snow whispered against the frozen windows of the Winter Palace. The girl stood alone by the gilded doorframe, her gloves too thin for the cold draft curling through the corridor. No one looked at her. No one asked her name. She had arrived 2 months ago, orphaned by the cholera that took her father, an obscure viscount of Livonia, and her mother, a baroness whose portrait hung forgotten in a distant ballroom. Now, she was merely the orphaned lady, a charity case in a palace that had no need for one. "Don't block the passage," the Duchess of Smolensk muttered as she swept by, skirts scuffing the marble. "You're not a statue." Giselle Orlanov dipped her head and stepped back, clutching the letter she had come to deliver. Her boots were still damp from the courtyard slush. She had been sent by the mistress of robes to deliver the Duchess's appointment card, but now she was invisible again, just like always. Behind her, heavy doors creaked open, and a voice called out, clear and clipped, "You're standing in a draft. Step inside, unless you prefer to freeze." She turned. He stood framed in the doorway of the Imperial Music Room, tall and sharp-eyed, in a navy uniform with gold braiding and epaulets that glinted in the light. Crown Prince Nikolai Volkov. Her heart stuttered. She had seen him before at Mass, across the ballroom, always distant but never this close. Never talking to her. Your Highness, I was just." "Come in," he said simply. "You're shivering." She obeyed, uncertain. The doors shut behind her, muffling the corridor's echo. The music room was warmer, lit by a fire crackling in the marble hearth and the soft glow of day filtering through pale blue silk curtains. Sheet music lay scattered on the piano. "You're the orphaned lady," he said without cruelty, only certainty. "Giselle Orlanov." She nodded, heat creeping up her neck. "Yes, Your Highness." He looked at her for a long moment, then gestured toward the armchair near the hearth. "Sit. You can stay a moment. You look like you've been standing in that hall for hours." "I was only delivering a card to the Duchess." "Then you've more patience than she deserves." She bit back a laugh, but he saw it, and something in his gaze softened. "I remember your father," he said after a pause, pouring tea into a porcelain cup. "He was at Tsarskoye Selo when I was a boy. He taught me how to saddle a pony." She blinked. "I didn't think anyone remembered him." Nikolai set the cup on a side table and motioned for her to take it. "I do. And I remember your mother's voice." She sang in 3 languages. Giselle took the tea with both hands, unsure what to say. No one had spoken of her parents since she arrived. Not once. "Why are you here?" he asked, but gently. "I was sent," she said, "by the Emperor's mercy. I have no dowry, no home. The court allows me to stay until something is arranged." His brow furrowed. "And what do you want?" "I want to be useful. I speak German, French. I studied calligraphy. I can copy documents neatly." He leaned back, watching her. "And do you play?" She hesitated. "A little." "Show me." He stood, walking to the piano. She followed, unsure of the rules now. He pulled out the bench for her. She sat. Her gloves made her clumsy, and she peeled them off, placing them beside the keys. Her fingers were pale, nails short and clean. Silence wrapped around them. She began to play a simple tune, one her mother used to hum when sewing. The notes were quiet, almost hesitant, but the melody was true. When she finished, she looked up. He was watching her hands. "You play like someone who remembers," he said. "I remember everything," she whispered. He nodded once. Then, without asking, he pulled a small leather-bound book from the piano's lower shelf, flipped through pages, and stopped at a melody she didn't recognize. "Play this tomorrow," he said. "I'll be here. 4 o'clock." She stared. "Why?" "Because no one else sees your worth," he said simply. "But I do." Her fingers clenched around the music. "Your Highness, if anyone sees." "They won't. They don't look. And you won't be here long, not unless someone notices." He stepped away then, nodding once, and left her there in the warm hush of the music room, the fire crackling behind her and a page of notes trembling in her hands. That night, Giselle hid the sheet in her mattress and didn't sleep. The next day, she arrived at the music room 10 minutes early. She waited. He came. Every afternoon after that, they met at 4. She played. He listened. Sometimes, he played too, his hands sure, trained. But he always let her begin. Then came the day when he handed her a sealed envelope, fine red wax pressed with the imperial crest. "Deliver this to my tutor," he said. "Personally." She blinked. Is that allowed? He raised a brow. Only if you're discreet. She took the letter, tucking it into her sleeve. Always. Outside, snow fell in heavy curtains. She slipped through the corridors, past the guards, and into the west wing where the royal tutors kept their quarters. She knocked once. Twice. The door opened. Inside, the tutor, a gray, bearded man with spectacles, glanced at the seal, then at her. You're not a maid, he said. No, she said. I'm Giselle Orlanov. The tutor broke the seal. His eyes scanned the letter. Then he looked at her again, sharp. You're the girl. The girl? He didn't answer. Instead, he said, he's asked me to teach you. She blinked. What? In secret, the tutor said, folding the letter. History, etiquette, court diplomacy. As if you were being prepared. For something. Her throat tightened. Am I? That depends, the tutor said. On how well you learn. In the weeks that followed, Giselle's days changed. Mornings were spent in the library, afternoons at the piano, evenings memorizing titles and treaties. All behind closed doors. All because one man had seen her worth. But rumors began to stir. She's always around him. A courtier whispered behind a fan. She's nothing. A project, another said. He'll tire of her soon. One morning, a page boy handed her a folded scrap of paper tucked beneath her tea tray. 6 words, scrawled in firm script. Meet me in the conservatory. Noon. She went. Of course she went. He was waiting by the roses, the glass above them fogged with frost. They're watching, he said quietly. I know. They'll try to stop this. I know. He looked at her then, truly looked, and reached for her gloved hand. His thumb brushed the seam at her wrist. I won't let them, he said. She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away. From that day, nothing stayed simple. Not the glances. Not the silences. Not the way her name began to echo in corridors. Until one morning, a summons arrived. She was to appear before the Empress. Alone. Giselle stood in the vestibule outside the Empress's private salon, her hands concealed within a fur muff that had once belonged to her mother. The valet who had led her here said nothing, merely nodded toward the double doors before slipping away down the corridor. The silence that followed was not empty. It rang with the hush of polished floors, velvet drapes, and the weight of a sovereign waiting. When the doors opened, the Empress was seated on a settee upholstered in pale gold damask, her posture precise, one gloved hand resting lightly on the armrest. Her hair, streaked with silver, was arranged high beneath a net of seed pearls. She did not rise. You are Lady Orlanov, she said, not as a question. Giselle curtsied, the hem of her gown brushing the parquet. Yes, your Imperial Majesty. Come closer. She obeyed, her slippers making no sound on the floor. The Empress's eyes, heavy-lidded and unreadable, rested on her with the same detachment one might offer a painting hung askew. You were educated at the convent in Riga, the Empress continued. Languages, embroidery, musical theory. Yes, your Majesty. You are now under the patronage of the Dowager Countess of Vyazma. The Countess offered me a place in her household until the court found a longer arrangement. The Empress tapped one finger against a small porcelain dish beside her. And how long have you been meeting with my son alone in the afternoons? Giselle's breath caught. She did not flinch. I have been studying music under his guidance. That is not what I asked. The fire in the hearth shifted, casting a ripple of gold across the floor. Since the end of November, your Majesty, she said carefully, I was asked to prepare certain compositions. The Empress turned her gaze to the flames. He is impulsive, like his father was. But I have never known him to waste time on meaningless things. Giselle remained still, unsure whether that was accusation or something more ambiguous. The Empress's voice softened but did not warm. Do you imagine you are the first girl to catch his attention? No, your Majesty. Then you should understand your place. You are here by grace, not entitlement. Giselle's throat tightened. I am aware. And yet you continue to accept his attention. I did not seek it. Yet you did not refuse it. There was a pause, long enough for the fire to crack once. Giselle's voice, when it came, was low but steady. I did not refuse it because he treated me as someone with a mind. Not a burden. Not a decoration. The Empress's eyes turned back to her. For a flicker of a moment, something shifted. I remember your mother, she said, unexpected. She danced with more grace than any duchess in this court. But she died of fever and left you with nothing. Yes, Your Majesty. The court has no memory. But I do. She rose slowly, her rings catching the firelight. You may continue your lessons. But you will not meet him alone again. Giselle bowed her head. As you command. Outside the salon, the corridor had chilled. A footman escorted her back toward the east wing, saying nothing until they reached the marble stair. His Highness is in the aviary, the footman murmured, just before turning away. She hesitated only a moment before slipping down the back stair, through the servants' corridor, and out into the frost-laced garden paths. The aviary stood at the far end of the grounds, a domed glass structure that shimmered faintly in the afternoon light. She stepped inside. Nikolai stood with one gloved hand resting on the edge of a perch, watching a pair of green finches flutter above a shallow basin. His coat was dusted with snow. She summoned you, he said, not turning. She knows everything. Of course she does. She said we can continue the lessons. But not alone. Now he turned, slowly. She's testing you. She already decided, Giselle said. I'm not suitable. His mouth tightened. No one is suitable unless they are born into the right name. She looked past him, to the birds wheeling in their glass heaven. Then why did you ask your tutor to train me? Because I needed more than a distraction, he said. I needed someone who understands silence. And restraint. And how to see without being seen. And what will you do now that she's forbidden us to be alone? I'll adapt. She let out a breath. You sound like a soldier. I was meant to be one, he said. But they sent me to diplomacy instead. Easier to lose a war with letters than with bullets. She stepped closer. The scent within the aviary was green moss, feathers, something blooming in the corners despite the snow outside. You don't pity me, she said. Not once. No, he said. Because you never asked for pity. He reached into his coat and drew out a narrow slip of folded paper. This is a coded passage. From a French diplomatic cipher. Translate it. Bring it to the library at dusk. Giselle took it without question. She said the court forgets. I don't. As she turned to leave, his fingers brushed lightly against hers, not enough to be seen, but enough to anchor her. That evening, she sat beneath the flickering gas lamps in the library's upper gallery, deciphering the message line by line. Each word revealed something more complex. Not merely a cipher, but a test. A mirror of her own place here, hidden, necessary, easily dismissed. By the time she descended the spiral stair to where he waited in the alcove by the atlas stand, she had the answer. It speaks of a trade agreement, she said. One that favors Prussia, but undercuts our grain exports. He nodded once. And the tone? Too formal. Which means resentment. He smiled, not out of amusement, but approval. Good. What are you preparing me for? He looked at her, and this time there was no distance in his gaze. For a future they'll never expect, he said. But one we'll make real. The frost had lifted just enough for the Neva to groan under its thinning crust, and the palace corridors now smelled faintly of melted snow and oiled wood. The court had turned restless. With Lent approaching, entertainments dwindled, and tension crept into the drawing rooms like a draft from the river. Giselle moved with care through the West Library, her skirts whispering over a Turkish rug whose corners curled with age. In her gloved hand, she carried a folio of translated dispatches that Nikolai had left for her in the hollow of a disused atlas. She had cross-referenced 2 passages and added notes in the margin, just as he had shown her. What's your assessment? He asked from behind a bookshelf. She turned, startled but composed. They're disguising agricultural terms for troop movements. The language is too vague otherwise. He stepped into view, dressed in a charcoal frock coat with a brass-buttoned waistcoat, his hair neatly parted for the council meeting he'd just left. You noticed the metaphor in the 4th paragraph? The one about harvesting before the storm? Yes. It's deliberate. They're preparing for something. Possibly in the Baltics. He took the folio and leafed through it while she stood beside the leather-bound volumes of Tacitus and Livy. The gaslight caught the edge of his collar, and she noticed for the first time the slight, where at the seams his uniform altered twice this winter, likely from the strain of constant travel. You've done better than half the men in the ministry, he said without looking up. Perhaps because you listen before you speak. She allowed herself one breath of satisfaction. You said the ministry wouldn't consider someone without a title. They still won't, he said, closing the folio. But I will. Outside the windows, snowmelt dripped from the eaves in slow, steady taps. She reached for a volume on the upper shelf, stretching on the tips of her boots. He stepped behind her and took it down in one motion, passing it to her without a word. His hand brushed the back of hers, deliberate this time, and she didn't move away. "When I was sent to Vienna last year," he said quietly, "they assigned me a count's daughter to entertain." She quoted Voltaire poorly and followed me from salon to salon as if proximity were persuasion. Giselle turned the book in her hands. "And what did you do?" "I told her I preferred substance over ceremony." He glanced toward the hallway. "That earned me a reprimand from my uncle." "Your uncle sits on the Foreign Council." "Yes, and he's been watching you." Giselle's chest tightened. "Then I should leave." "No," he handed her a folded page from inside his coat. "You should come with me." She unfolded it. A list of names, cities, dates. "You're leaving for Warsaw?" she asked. "Tomorrow night. Under diplomatic pretense. I've arranged for you to travel as part of the delegation." She looked up sharply. "That's impossible. You'll be listed as a language advisor under Count Arseniev's seal. No one will question it, at least not until we're already across the border." She stepped back. "If the Empress finds out." "She already has," he said, "and she hasn't forbidden it." Giselle stared at the paper. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't answer at once. When he did, his voice was lower than she'd ever heard it. "Because I've been raised among marble and masks. And you are the only person I've met who speaks without either." She folded the list and tucked it into her glove. "Then we must be very careful." That night, she packed what little she owned into a carpet bag lined in faded silk. No servants were informed. No one saw her slip out through the servants' wing and into the waiting carriage with the Count's secretary. They traveled under cover of darkness, the wheels muffled with felt, the horses chosen for silence rather than speed. By dawn, they were well beyond the city, moving through birch-lined roads where the snow had thinned to a dull crust. Nikolai joined them outside Pskov, riding beside the carriage on a borrowed gelding. When he climbed inside, his coat dusted with road grime, he didn't speak at first. He simply sat across from her, knees nearly touching, the motion of the wheels making the lantern sway. "Warsaw won't be like St. Petersburg," he said eventually. "The court there is brittle, suspicious. I can be quiet when needed." "I don't want you to be quiet," he said. "I want you to be exact. They'll test you." She met his gaze. "Then let them." When they arrived in Warsaw 2 days later, the delegation was met by a Polish nobleman with a limp and a face carved by years of compromise. The palace there was warmer than expected, its halls scented with cedar and beeswax, but every corridor echoed with unsaid things. Giselle stood beside Nikolai during the formal reception, her presence explained as an interpreter for the Baltic negotiations. No one questioned her. Not aloud. That evening, he found her in the conservatory beneath a canopy of dusty vines. "You held your own with the archbishop," he said. He asked about the grain tariffs. "I responded in Latin. You chose your moment. I remembered what you said. Speak with precision." He stepped closer. "And if I asked you something now?" "That depends on how precise you are." He reached into his coat. From the inner pocket, he drew a ring, simple, gold, with a single sapphire no larger than the head of a pin. "It belonged to my great-grandmother," he said. "My mother gave it to me when I turned 18, with instructions to offer it only when I was certain." Giselle's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. "I can't offer a crown," he said. "Not yet, but I can offer my promise." She looked at the ring, then at him. "Then you must wear it for now, until it's safe for me to do so." He hesitated, then slipped it onto his smallest finger, where it fit perfectly. And for the first time, neither of them looked over their shoulder. The Warsaw Embassy garden, once a carefully planned French arrangement of boxwood and fountains, had grown wild at the edges under years of Russian administration. In early spring, its formal lines still lay buried beneath frost-bitten soil, but a single row of snowdrops had begun to pierce through near the retaining wall. Giselle stood beside the stone balustrade overlooking the river, her gloved hands clasped in front of her. The morning air was heavy with mist. She had just returned from a closed briefing with Count Arseniev, where she'd been asked to translate a Polish noble's petition involving land repatriation. The Polish was dense, legalistic, and bitter, but she had rendered it faithfully, and afterward, no one had spoken to her, though they had looked. She heard footsteps on the gravel behind her and didn't turn. She recognized the cadence measured, decisive, but without the ostentation of a man trying to be heard. "You were right. Nikolai said, coming to stand beside her. They'll never say it aloud, but they're beginning to rely on your clarity. She kept her eyes on the mist curling off the water. That doesn't mean they'll accept it. They don't need to. Not yet. A pair of crows lifted from a distant branch, cawing once before vanishing into the gray. I think they want me to fail, she said, so they can write it off as a misjudgment rather than a threat. You won't fail. You say that as if certainty were safety. He turned toward her. I say it because I've watched you navigate a room full of men who see only what they expect. You speak when it matters. You hold your ground. That's not common. She glanced down at the hem of her coat, where the wool had picked up a faint smear of ash from the embassy's hearth that morning. They'll shift the terms again, she said. The petition I translated today, it's not about land. It's a test of whether the ministry will enforce Russian codes or yield to local claims. They will yield, he said, because we need the railroad to pass through their territory. And they know it. Giselle nodded once. Then I'll draft the reply, in terms that acknowledge precedent, but not submission. When she turned to him, she saw the quiet pride in his gaze, the kind that never demanded recognition but offered it freely. Do you ever regret not being born second? She asked. He tilted his head. I don't follow. If you were a younger son, none of this would be expected of you. You could have chosen a quieter path. Do you think I want quiet? He asked. I want precision. I want a future where I don't have to explain the worth of the person beside me. She lowered her voice. And you think that's something we can shape from here? I think it's something we can start from here, he said. But not finish. There was a long pause. A gust of wind lifted the edge of her scarf and set the snowdrops nodding. I received a letter, he said. From my mother. Giselle's breath caught, but she didn't speak. She summoned me to Tsarskoye Selo. Alone. She won't allow this, she said. She doesn't have to allow it. She only has to believe it's inevitable. Giselle met his eyes. And is it? Yes, he said, without hesitation. Not because of defiance. Because of clarity. She nodded once. Then go. I want you to come with me. She shook her head. Not yet. Let her see that I didn't follow you. That I stand where I'm needed. You think that will matter? I think she values restraint. His expression shifted something deeper than agreement, but not yet relief. I'll return in 6 days, he said, with either an answer or a refusal. But I will return. The next morning, he left before sunrise, accompanied only by a military attaché and a sealed satchel of diplomatic papers. Giselle watched from an upper window as his sleigh pulled away into the fog, the hooves muffled by damp earth and early thaw. The embassy quieted after his departure. Meetings resumed, but with less urgency. The Count grew more cautious with her, as if afraid to use what might soon become untouchable. Giselle kept her head down and her translation sharp. She revised a memorandum on customs levies. She drafted a notice of legal neutrality for the grain shipments passing through Lublin. 3 days passed. On the 4th, a knock came at her chamber door. It was a page, no older than 12, with a folded telegram in hand. No seal. Only her name written in a careful Cyrillic hand. She opened it slowly. He had arrived safely. The Empress had agreed to hear him. No decision yet. That night, she sat in the conservatory with a ledger open on her lap, but her eyes never touched the page. The frost had returned, glinting faintly on the panes. She didn't sleep. On the 6th day, the carriage returned just before dusk. She didn't go to meet him. She waited in the embassy's west salon, where the fire had been lit and the lamps turned low. He entered without ceremony, still in his travel coat, boots damp from the road. She asked me if I understood what I was doing. He said without greeting. I told her no, because I've never done it before. But I know what I want. Giselle stood. She asked what you would do if I lost favor. If you'd still stand beside me. I would, she said. She believed you. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and drew out a document. Not folded, a certificate. Signed and bearing the imperial crest. She didn't forbid it, he said. She gave her consent. Quietly. Without announcement. But it's there. Giselle took it with both hands, reading the name and the title it now conferred. It was not nobility. Not an elevation. But it was recognition. Permission to accompany him openly as a diplomatic attaché, with authority to advise. He stepped closer. There will be whispers. They'll say it's favoritism. That you're only here because of me. I don't care. I do, he said softly. Because you're here because of you. She looked up at him then, and for the first time, There was no caution in her expression, only certainty. He reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't hesitate when his fingers closed around hers. In the quiet of the West Salon, with the snow beginning to fall again just beyond the glass, she lifted her other hand to the lapel of his coat and whispered, "Now we begin." And he answered, "Together."